My sister didn't discover my money because I bragged, or slipped up in conversation, or suddenly decided I wanted my family to see me. She discovered it because she walked into my old bedroom without knocking, saw my laptop open, and decided, like she always did, that whatever belonged to me also belonged to her. If you grew up in one of those families where one child is the sun and everyone else is expected to orbit quietly, you already understand the shape of what comes next. You understand the way the past doesn't stay in the past, how it stacks up like plates nobody washes, and one day the whole tower tips over because someone reaches for the top dish like it was always theirs. I'm Sarah. I'm 38, and this is the first time I've ever told the story in one straight line, from the beginning, without making excuses for the people who trained me to be grateful for scraps. When I was little, before my sister, my parents were not affectionate, but they were present. That's the best word I have for it. My mother helped me with homework. My father took me fishing on Lake St. Clair when the weather was mild and his mood was mild, and I remember thinking, in the simple way children think, that this was what a family was. Not perfect, not warm, but intact. Then, when I was 8, my Aunt Kelly showed up at our house at 2 in the morning. I still remember the light from the porch cutting across the hallway, my mother's voice thin and sharp, my father moving too fast, the sound of luggage zippers. Aunt Kelly knelt in front of me in her coat and said, "Pack a small suitcase, honey. Your mom's in the hospital." I asked if she was going to die. I didn't even know why I asked that. I just felt the air in the house change, like the walls had tilted. "No," my aunt said quickly. "No, but your sister is coming, and she's early." My sister, Rachel, was supposed to arrive in 2 months. She arrived that night anyway. The next weeks blurred into hospital corridors and whispered conversations and the constant smell of antiseptic. When they finally let me see Rachel, she was so small she looked unreal, like a doll someone had forgotten to finish painting. She had tubes, wires, tiny fists that didn't quite close. Nobody let me touch her. Nobody let me get too close. I remember standing behind a line of tape on the floor like it was a border, watching my parents bend over her incubator as if the world had narrowed into a single fragile rectangle of plastic. And I remember understanding something without having language for it. There was Rachel, and there was everything else, and I was now part of everything else. When Rachel came home, our house turned into a sterile bubble. My mother became obsessed with germs. I don't mean the normal kind of wash your hands caution. I mean industrial disinfectant. Stations of hand sanitizer in every room. Bleach on every surface. Windows cracked in winter because she believed the air needed to move. The sharp chemical smell got into my clothes, my hair, my books, until it felt like the house itself was trying to scrub me out of it. And then there was the new rule, the rule that shaped my entire childhood with one simple message. You are a risk. If I sneezed once, I was sent away. If I coughed, I was sent away. If I told my mother my throat felt scratchy, I was sent away. Sometimes it was to my grandmother Marie's house. Sometimes it was Aunt Kelly. It happened so often that I started keeping a small bag half-packed, like a child-sized emergency kit for being inconvenient. First, I didn't hate it. Grandma Marie made cookies and asked questions, real questions, the kind that made you feel like you existed beyond your utility. Aunt Kelly had shelves of Nancy Drew books and the quiet patience to let me sit on the carpet and read for hours. But children aren't stupid. After enough trips, you stop believing you're being treated like a guest, and you realize you're being handled like a contaminant. Like your body, just by being near, could damage the person everyone loved more. I tried, for years, to earn my way back into the center. I got straight A's. My mother nodded without looking up from medical charts and appointment calendars. I won first prize at the science fair with a project on renewable energy, and my father asked if I could store my display board in the garage because Rachel was allergic to cardboard dust. I didn't even know if that was a real thing. I just knew it didn't matter. If Rachel needed a reason, the reason would appear. The moment that cracked something in me happened when I was 12. I'd been practicing for the school talent show for months, teaching myself bridge over troubled water on the piano because I wanted to play something that sounded like help, like rescue, like someone reaching across a distance. On the night of the show, Rachel had a 99. One fever, not a crisis, not an emergency, a low-grade temperature that barely registered. My parents didn't come. I played anyway, under bright lights, staring into an audience of strangers and empty seats, with the ugly understanding that the point wasn't whether I was good or not. The point was that my presence was optional. 2 weeks later, the entire family, both sets of grandparents, my aunt, even a cousin I barely knew, attended Rachel's 15-minute flute recital, during which she murdered hot cross buns, like she'd been personally offended by it. Rachel learned the system early. By 7, she'd outgrown most of the real health issues from being premature, but that didn't stop her from performing fragility like it was a talent. Headache? She stayed home. Feeling tired? Someone else did her chores. Worried about a test? My mother called the school and demanded an extension like the world was obligated to soften every edge for her. And then, like a slow and permanent weather pattern, my life became a series of small sacrifices made quietly so Rachel could feel large. I spent more time alone. I read. I drew. I learned how to disappear inside my own mind because it was safer there. Ironically, my room became my sanctuary not because my parents respected my privacy, but because Rachel claimed she was allergic to my lavender air freshener. It was the only space she refused to invade, and I clung to it like it was my own country. Grandma Marie was the one bright thread woven through all of this. She had a collection of vintage costume jewelry, brooches, bracelets, rings that glittered even in dim lamplight, and she'd let me sort it, catalog it, arrange it in little trays like I was curating a museum. She'd sit at the kitchen table with tea and watch me work, and sometimes she'd tell stories, who wore what, why a piece mattered, how to tell the difference between something cheap and something merely pretending to be. It didn't feel like training then. Felt like being seen. In my parents' house, they rewrote history constantly to excuse themselves. Rachel needs more attention, my mother would say, in the same tone people used to explain weather. She had such a rough start. Sarah's independent. My father would add, as if independence was something you were born with, not something you were forced into when you learned nobody was coming to check on you. I was a child. I didn't understand why being healthy made me less deserving of love. But I learned self-sufficiency with a kind of ruthless speed. When no one monitors your failures or celebrates your wins, you start acting like the only witness you can depend on is yourself. By high school, I treated my life like an escape plan. My desk looked like a magazine spread, color-coded notes, schedules, lists, everything in place. Not because I was naturally organized, but because control was the only comfort I had. Rachel teased me for it, called me Rainman, laughed as if discipline was something pathetic. I joined clubs. I worked part-time at a diner called Carson's, where the owner, Carol, remembered my birthday even when my parents forgot it. She'd slip me extra pie at the end of shifts and say things like, "Baby, the loudest folks usually have the least to offer." I didn't realize until later how much that sentence would matter. Debate team was where I found my voice. There's a specific satisfaction in dismantling someone's argument while staying calm, while proving, with logic and patience, that their certainty has cracks. It taught me negotiation. It taught me how to build a case so strong that even people who wanted to ignore it had to look at it. I won state twice. My parents didn't attend either competition because Rachel had major games. She was on the C team. She didn't even play. Junior year, I took the SAT and scored a perfect 1600. I stared at the results online for nearly 20 minutes. Sure it was a mistake. Sure the screen would refresh and correct itself. Sure I didn't get to have things like this. I ran home anyway. My mother was in the kitchen helping Rachel with English homework. Rachel was struggling. My mother was focused. I stood there with my heart pounding, holding the printout like it was evidence that I existed. "Mom," I said, "I got a perfect SAT score." My mother glanced up for half a second. "That's nice, honey," she said, and immediately lowered her voice. "But can you keep it down? Rachel's trying to concentrate. She has a big test." Rachel looked over her shoulder, smirked, and said, "Some of us actually have to study, Miss Perfect." My mother rushed to soothe her. "Sweetie, don't stress. You're just a different kind of learner." I still have that SAT score printout somewhere. It never made it to the refrigerator. But when Rachel brought home a C+ in English, my mother taped it up with a "We're so proud of you" magnet like it was a Nobel Prize. College applications were the first major thing I did entirely alone. I applied to 15 schools without telling anyone. I wrote my own essays. I gathered my own recommendations. I filled out financial aid forms late after school with my guidance counselor, Mr. Chun, because my parents were too busy to deal with it, which was a polite way of saying they didn't care. The acceptance letters started coming like a quiet avalanche. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Michigan, scholarship offers attached. I hid them in a locked box under my bed because I knew exactly what would happen if Rachel discovered them. Suddenly my future would become a family discussion centered on her feelings, and I would be asked, again, to shrink my life so she could feel comfortable. When I received a full ride, Rachel made junior varsity cheerleading. Guess which achievement got a family celebration dinner? I ate microwaved mac and cheese in my room while they went to Olive Garden and posted photos like it was a milestone worthy of public announcement. The summer before college, I worked double shifts at Carson's to save money anyway, just in case, because when you're raised in scarcity of attention, you start believing you should always be ready for the rug to be pulled out. Move-in day at the University of Michigan arrived, and my parents didn't come because Rachel had a cheer competition. Aunt Kelly drove me instead. She helped me set up my dorm, hugged me too tightly, and pressed an envelope into my hand. "Grandma Marie wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was $500, saved slowly from Social Security checks, from someone who had seen me sorting jewelry at a kitchen table and decided I deserved something real. That first night in my dorm room, I sat on the unfamiliar bed, surrounded by boxes and the scent of cheap laundry detergent, and I cried. Not because I was sad, but because relief can hurt when it's the first time you've felt it in years. I promised myself something in the dark, a promise I didn't fully understand yet. I promised I would build a life so solid, so unmistakably mine, that no one would ever be able to pretend I didn't matter. And I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for the 8-year-old girl who kept getting sent away for sneezing, who learned that love in her house was conditional, and that the condition was never her. College felt unreal at first, like I'd wandered into someone else's movie by mistake. There were nights fueled by instant ramen and caffeine, mornings where the air smelled like wet concrete and ambition, conversations that didn't start with apologies for existing. For the first time in my life, nobody knew my sister. Nobody expected me to step aside. I was just Sarah, and that alone felt radical. I thrived in the quiet independence of it. I graduated summa cum laude from the University of Michigan. My parents didn't attend the ceremony. They were busy helping Rachel transfer to her third college in 2 years. I didn't even feel surprised anymore. By then, I understood that some people can watch you climb a mountain and still ask why you didn't carry them on your back. After graduation, I took an entry-level job at a high-end auction house in Detroit. I won't use the real name, but if you're familiar with the industry, you know the type: old money clients, hushed voices, items that had survived wars, estates emptied after quiet deaths. My job was not glamorous. I cataloged belongings from people who would never know my name: china sets, furniture, boxes of what everyone casually labeled costume jewelry. Paid the bills, and more importantly, it let me observe. Then came the Kingston estate. Mrs. Kingston was an elderly widow with no children, and her house was packed floor to ceiling with jewelry. Drawers full of brooches, tangled necklaces, rings piled like loose change. Everyone assumed it was imitation, the kind of thing you sell in bulk and move on from. I was sorting through a tray when something caught my attention. An Art Deco brooch. Modest, understated, but it felt wrong in my hand. Too heavy, too precise. The clasp alone was more complex than it had any right to be if it were fake. I spent my entire lunch break researching, then my evenings, then my weekends. I used the company's antique databases. I cross-referenced maker marks. I stayed late, heart racing, because the more I looked, the more certain I became that this wasn't costume jewelry at all. The problem was simple. I was new. Nobody would believe me, so I did what debate team had trained me to do. I built a case. I learned everything I could about Art Deco authentication. I paid for an online gemology course with what little savings I had. I compiled documentation, images, historical context, and comparative analysis until my argument was airtight. When I finally approached my boss, Mr. Harrison barely looked up from his phone. "We've already cataloged those as costume pieces," he said. "I know," I replied calmly. "But the maker marks match Cartier's 1925 signatures exactly." That got his attention. The brooch sold at auction for $47,000. It turned out to be part of a limited collection created for a European elite circle in the 1920s. After that, Harrison started handing me other questionable items, and I kept finding them. What had once been a quiet childhood pastime, sorting Grandma Marie's jewelry at a kitchen table, had turned into a skill that made people real money. I devoured knowledge, courses, manuals, estate sales, authentication techniques. My apartment walls were soon covered in printouts of hallmarks and certification guidelines, like a detective's board made of gold and silver. My commission checks grew. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was saving. My family, meanwhile, remained blissfully uninterested. At Sunday dinners, yes, I still went like an idiot. The conversations followed the same pattern. "Sarah still works at that antique shop, right?" My mother would ask someone, as if I weren't sitting there. "Auction house," I'd correct gently. "Oh," Rachel would interrupt, holding up her latest mall purchase. "You guys have to see this bracelet I bought. Isn't it cute?" I stopped trying to explain. Then came the Rothschild collection. 2 years into my job, the firm was assigned to catalog the estate of an old money family with deep European ties. There was buzz in the industry. Expectations were high. That's when I spotted it. An unassuming Art Nouveau piece that everyone else dismissed. I spent 3 days researching it, barely sleeping, until the truth emerged. It was from a private French collection believed to have been lost during World War II. It sold for $238,000. Harrison called me into his office afterward. "You're wasting your talent here," he said. "You should be running your own authentication business." I laughed it off at first. With what money? With what safety net? But the idea lodged itself in my mind. I began doing small freelance authentication jobs on the side. Word spread. Collectors reached out. Estate lawyers called. One night, sitting alone in my modest apartment surrounded by manuals and tools, I realized something terrifying and liberating. I could do this. So I did what reasonable people do when they have no one to fall back on. I emptied my savings, took on debt, rented a tiny office space above a Chinese restaurant that always smelled like Kung Pao chicken. The Wi-Fi only worked if you sat in the corner by the window. It was mine. The first months were brutal. I woke at 4 in the morning with cold sweats, calculating how long my money would last. My furniture consisted of a card table from Goodwill and a chair I found on the curb. But reputation matters in high-end jewelry, and my years at the auction house had given me credibility. 6 months in, a collector brought me a Victorian-era collection for verification. I worked for 2 weeks straight. When the pieces sold, my commission was $86,000. More money than I had earned in the previous 2 years combined. The phone started ringing constantly after that. By year 2, I hired my first employee. By year 3, we moved downtown. By year 5, we had offices in Detroit, Chicago, and New York. I was quoted in Forbes under my company name, not my own. And through all of it, my family still believed I worked at that little antique shop. I let them. There was something darkly comforting about watching them dismiss me while I quietly closed deals worth more than their mortgage. I wore understated clothes to dinner, drove a sensible car, listened to Rachel brag about entry-level marketing wins while I authenticated 7-figure collections that afternoon. The irony became a private joke. Eventually, I began sending my parents money anonymously. First $5,000 a month, then $7,000. They thought it came from Aunt Kelly or some vague family source. They treated me like a noble charity case, sacrificing everything to help the family. Rachel took the credit. When she announced she wanted an MBA at a private university, my mother called me in tears. "Your sister deserves this," she said. "She needs to maintain standards." I increased the payments. My accounts barely noticed. But something inside me hardened. Because every Sunday, I was reminded that success doesn't change how people see you if they've already decided who you are. And I knew, deep down, that this double life couldn't last forever. I just didn't know it would explode at Thanksgiving. I think I always knew the truth would surface in a room full of people. Secrets don't like silence. They wait for noise, for witnesses, for the kind of setting where reactions can't be hidden or softened. And my family had always loved an audience. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my mother called me crying. She had a herniated disc, she said. Cooking for 20 people felt impossible. Her voice carried that familiar mixture of pain and expectation, the tone that assumed I would step in quietly, without asking for anything in return. I told her I'd handle the food. "I can have it catered," I said. There was a pause, then concern. "Oh honey, we can't afford a caterer." "Don't worry about the cost," I replied. "I've been saving." She asked if I was taking out a loan. I told her no. I coordinated everything with a high-end catering firm I regularly used for business events. The kind of food that makes people fall silent after the first bite. It cost more than my parents believed I earned in 2 months. Thanksgiving morning arrived calm and clear. I brought my laptop because I was monitoring a major auction in Hong Kong. An Art Nouveau necklace my client wanted authenticated if they won the bid. The food arrived on time. Everything was perfect. Rachel, of course, found something to criticize. "Store-bought stuffing?" she said loudly. "Mom's is way better." My mother apologized to everyone for not cooking herself, while still enjoying every bite. Rachel shut up after tasting the maple-glazed Brussels sprouts, which cost more per plate than her weekly grocery budget. I stepped away between dinner and dessert to check my laptop. I set up in my old bedroom, the one my mother had preserved like a shrine, while Rachel's room had been renovated 3 times. That's when everything went wrong. I'd left my authentication software open. Multiple tabs. Account summaries. Active contracts. Rachel walked in without knocking. She glanced at the screen and smiled. That smile, the one that meant she'd found leverage. "Let's show everyone what Sarah's really been doing," she said. Before I could stop her, she grabbed my laptop and walked into the dining room. 20 people. Wine flowing. Laughter mid-breath. Time to see how important Sarah's work really is, Rachel announced, flipping the screen toward the table. The room went silent. My account balance glowed on the screen. $12. 4 million. Pending contracts. Quarterly profits. 7-figure transactions. Rachel's face went pale. This can't be right, she whispered. Mom laughed. Actually laughed. Don't be silly. Sarah works at that little antique shop. I stood up slowly. Yes, I said. Actually, I own one of the largest jewelry authentication firms in the country. You could hear the clock ticking. I explained, calmly. Offices in 3 cities. Years of work. Millions authenticated. My mother's laughter turned into fury. You have all this money? She screamed, knocking over her chair. And you let us struggle? I send you $7,000 a month, I replied. She stared at me like I'd betrayed her. Your sister has student loans, she said. She deserves more. Not congratulations. Not pride. Entitlement. Rachel started crying. Dad accused me of selfishness, of owing them, of forgetting who raised me. Something inside me finally broke. You didn't raise me, I said. You managed me. You sent me away whenever I was inconvenient. You missed every achievement because Rachel might feel left out. You paid for her schools and ignored mine. And now you're angry because I didn't hand you my life? The catering staff stood frozen, dessert plates hovering. I picked up my laptop, took my bag, walked out. Behind me, my mother was already talking about how to spend my money. By the time I reached my car, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, messages, accusations. Within an hour, my family group chat exploded. Rachel posted on Facebook about betrayal and hidden wealth. Distant relatives crawled out of nowhere with opinions about my moral obligations. The following Monday, they showed up at my office. Mom, Dad, Rachel sitting in the reception area like they owned it. They demanded trust funds, retirement homes, $2 million for Rachel to start her life properly. I canceled the monthly transfers in front of them. Security escorted them out. I issued legal notices, changed numbers, moved houses. Grandma Marie, when my mother called her crying, simply said, "Good for Sarah. About time someone in this family succeeded on their own terms." It's been 6 months since Thanksgiving. My business is thriving. My life is quiet. For the first time, I don't shrink to make others comfortable. And the strangest part? I don't miss them. Some stories don't end with apologies. They end with understanding. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. This was Block Tales.